Welcome back. Our next guest has made a career out of tackling the big questions often left out of polite conversation in her podcast, Death, Sex, and Money.
Now, Anna Sale is diving deeper into tough topics with her new book, Let's Talk About Hard Things. Anna joins us now. Thanks for being here today, Anna.
I'm so glad to be with you.
Well, Anna, given the year we've all had, I think it's understandable that a lot of people have a sort of fatigue surrounding heavy topics. Can you share what you think is gained by, sort of leaning into these conversations?
I mean, I sort of believe this all the time, but especially now when we are regathering for the first time, I think there's a lot to be gained from kind of moving beyond just the regular pitter patter of small talk and acknowledging what each of us has been through. And that's just by signaling something like, just maybe admitting what's been a little tough for you lately. And then what I think is really incredible is when somebody hears that and they have something that's feeling really heavy on their own shoulders, they might share it with you. And otherwise, it might be something they didn't have anyone to talk about this hard thing with.
So your book is divided into 5 sections. There are death, sex, money, family, and identity. Personally, I feel like money and death are probably the hardest that I find to talk about. But you write that we actually used to lean on institutions and rituals for these topics that we really don't have anymore. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with money and death. I mean, think about just how our societies were different about 50 years ago, for example, and not I'm saying better or worse, but different. There was more ritual, shared convention, kind of places to go when you were experiencing big questions about death and money. Like think about how the centrality of the church in a community, how that's changed, for example. Or even where you do your banking. It used to be that you went to a town neighborhood bank and had a professional that you could talk to. Now we're alone with our keyboards late at night, hoping we're making the right decisions. So when you don't have those places to go, these hard things are not new. But what is different is more is on our own shoulders as individuals to try to figure out how to navigate through and to help each other in our most personal relationships.
I love that. You said that so perfectly. Now, I want to talk about family because I've joked that I'm fine talking family with anyone who isn't actually a family member. So why can it be so difficult to talk to the people in our family and grow these relationships?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's why I wanted to add the family chapter to this book, because it's not just a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard setting in which to have these conversations, because these are people where there's an expectation of understanding, familiarity, shared origin. So when you do come up against these feelings of tension or misunderstanding, that alone can feel painful. You can look at your family and say, why don't you get me here? Like, why is this hard? And one of the main points I wanted to make in the chapter was that is actually what happens in family. That is a natural tension. Because if you think about what growing up is, it is starting out as a baby in this family unit and growing up and separating. So that feeling of separation is actually really normal. So instead of thinking, oh, why do I feel this way? Maybe it's more, how do I have a conversation about like, oh, I really, I think about how we grew up and how we talked about this. And I've noticed in my life now as an adult, I'm kind of I'm approaching it a different way. Let's talk about that in a way that doesn't feel so much like you're just fighting against this idea of difference existing in family. In fact, it's quite healthy to have some difference from your family members, even though it can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, especially with political divisions, I feel. And we've seen that a lot, probably in the last couple of years, how that can really strain a relationship, a familial relationship. But you talked to a woman named Pam and her stepfather, George, who faced this. How did they overcome those political differences?
Well, I want to say first, Pam and her stepfather, they had always had a tough relationship. Pam wasn't really thrilled when her mother married George, and they just clashed. And part of that was George was a strict kind of father figure guy, and Pam didn't like that. And they had really different values. Pam identifies as a political liberal. George is a conservative Baptist who voted for Trump, for example. And they ended up having to spend more time together during the 2016 election in the US because Pam's mother was suffering from dementia and was moving at that time into an assisted living facility. So all of a sudden, Pam is in George's house without her mother for the first time. And they knew that they disagreed about all of these things. And two critical things happened that I think allowed them to have a still loving relationship. The first was Pam noticed when she started spending time in George's home, he turned off Fox News, which is something that was always on in his home. So she saw him trying to make her comfortable. He was willing to take a step to welcome her in. So they watched a lot of Family Feud, the game show. So they didn't watch political news. And then when it did creep in, at one point, George just turned to Pam and said, I just want to let you know, our relationship is more important to me than politics. And Pam said back to him, no, I feel the same way. And once they had set up those guardrails about how they were going to treat one another when they came across their disagreements, it allowed them actually to be more curious about their political differences. They could talk about politics. George could say, I don't understand sanctuary cities and why you support that immigration policy. And Pam could say, I don't understand why you're opposed to LGBT rights. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And they could talk about it and be curious about one another. And those differences did not go away. I think that's really critical. They didn't all of a sudden realize they agreed. But what they realized is there was something else to tend to, which was that they both very much loved this woman who was declining, and they needed each other while they were grieving.
You know, we have to say that you interviewed so many interesting people in your book, but one of them was actually your ex-husband. So that, yes, I can imagine, could be a really interesting and challenging conversation. What did you learn from it?
You know, I went into that interview, we had been divorced for almost 10 years by that point. And I thought, you know, I sort of had this idea, like, what did we miss? You know, this marriage ended. Was there a hard conversation that we just avoided or were too scared to have that was part of that unraveling? And in a way, it was unsatisfying to do this interview with him, because as I was asking him these questions about his experience of the end of our marriage, I realized I wasn't learning anything new. I realized we had talked about all of this. And what it really showed me was, oh, we did the hard conversations we needed to do, and they felt unsatisfactory and sad because they were uncovering something sad and unsatisfactory, which was that we wanted different things, and our marriage had stopped making sense. And so it was really like, it made me have a lot of compassion for both of us, because that was a hard, painful time. It wasn't what we thought was going to happen when we got married, but it allowed me to really think about, sometimes hard conversations, sometimes it's okay to stop talking because you've learned what you need to learn from them.
Yeah. Oh, Anna, thank you so much for this fascinating and beautiful conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really nice to talk with you all.
The book is called Let's Talk About Hard Things, and be sure to check it out. We're taking a break right now, but we'll be right back.